Hey everyone, today for another vlog, and for today I want to talk about how the most courageous thing in life is, first of all, to not hate yourself. So that's the prompt comes from a tweet by Vissa, which I will link in the video. But that tweet is essentially what I just said. You know how the most I think he uses the word heroic thing in life is to not hate yourself. Um, yeah, it's pretty crazy to look at how prevalent self-hatred, the obvious forms of it, like low self-esteem, for instance, but also like the more subtle forms of it, such as narcissism. Like narcissism. It might seem like it's about like the usual form of narcissism that is, I guess some people have a more broader view of it, but the usual form of narcissism is like grandiosity, seeing yourself as amazing person, only talking about yourself and so on. It I feel like to me it really strikes me as implicitly a fragile ego that you must protect with a new ego, so to speak, or like a new identity, right? So when a certain identity is, or like your core identity rather, feels too weak with regards to society, it seems to me that one of the main mechanisms we have as social species is to like create a new identity. And so like one of the ways those no one such strategy is like the narcissist identity, right? So like the putting on an air of grandiosity and that you're the best and so on, that you're incredibly important, such that you can somehow survive within the social environment, like such that your ego can somehow exist in a sense. Because otherwise, like it seems like it's incredibly common for people to come out of school. At least it's definitely my case to come out of school with this super constant sense of low self-esteem, subtle self-hatred, and all that. Like just the sense that the only way you can get to do something, for instance, the only way you can do something productive is by discipline or shaming yourself somehow. That's like kind of like the unconscious thing that school sort of teaches you. It's not so much the actual school matter. It's more like the obedience part, the fear of the authority, and your attitude towards the work. I would say like the idea that the only way you can really do work is by being tense around it and being stressed around grades and all that. It's really like what has been the thing I've learned from school. Sadly, it's not so much the actual course matters. I mean, I did well at school, but like that's not really the main thing that has stuck with me afterwards. It's really I noticed the source of motivation which I talked about in the previous vlog, like the shame engine and the self hatred. It's it's really crazy how much it shapes society. Like I just thought about it for like 1 or 2 minutes before this vlog, and it's kind of crazy. Like for example, first off, uh, it makes me wonder like how much of the entertainment industry is shaped by the fact that people cannot stand being by themselves. And why don't people stand being by themselves? So, like, a big part of it is that society at large sort of destroys the present moment in a sense, right? Like it doesn't really value it and always puts you in a like stressed state and thinking about the future and so on. But like I think another part of it is that people aren't comfortable being themselves because there's like this self-hatred in the way, right? So um, I don't think it's just that the present moment is kind of devalued. I think it's also that yeah, it's kind of uncomfortable being with themselves for a lot of people. Like like the silence leads to just you being with yourself, and when the only relationship you have with yourself is one of clear coercion, or more precisely, it's more like internalized uh, dictatorship in a sense, or like because children do not treat themselves this way. They only internalize this coercive tone with themselves through education, through public propaganda. Essentially, is what I would consider that aspect of school. Um, because it doesn't seem natural at all to me that this would be how we treat ourselves. I think this strikes to me as very obviously like a social response. Like, this is how our minds sort of work with regards to the social groups we grow up with. We just tend to internalize those beliefs. And so, yeah, that self-hatred to me is just something, it's internalized. So first off, it starts off external, then it becomes internalized, which means that it can also be like rebooted in a sense. Like you can unlearn that societal program because of how plastic the mind is. But it's obviously not as easy as in childhood, right? But in a sense, it is easier in another sense because as an adult you have more resources and you're more conscious. So it's not necessarily harder, but it requires conscious effort. Right? It doesn't just happen automatically. But yeah, so that was the first thing I was thinking about, like how much of the entertainment industry it exists just because of like this health hatred that gets in the way of the relationship with them of yourself. Um, the second aspect is like like relationships between people. Obviously, like when people have uh, self hatred, it obviously really impacts the relationship with other people because it becomes difficult for you to feel properly loved by other people because like a part of you doesn't accept that. A part of you feels like it's just a part of you feels like it's just a matter of time until they find out, right? Until they find out that you're just unlikable and all that. So the self hatred is really, it can be really toxic actually. It can be can quickly lead to like ghosting or like breaking up with people before they can break up with you. Like it seems like it seems like this would be the plot of a bad story, right? Like that someone breaks up with people because they feel being rejected. But this is actually a very real human behavior. It's not just the type of thing you would hear in stories. It's very real. Um, and I think with like how to say, as online becomes more and more the media through which people interact, I think it will tend to happen more and more because uh, I think just in general people are more and more isolated, and so they search for like the safer and safer options. And because personal relationships are inherently not safe, right? Like the good and the bad parts of relationships is precisely because of the vulnerability, which can be good because that's precisely what is good, right? Like seeing someone else as they are and being yourself as well. But at the same time, it's scary as fuck because you're vulnerable, right? You're showing yourself and all that. And I think with online relationships becoming more, how to say, with online being the more dominant media, um, I think it just leads to like very uh away relationships. Does that make sense? But like relationships where you don't really have to be vulnerable. And so like because people are so scared of yeah, being vulnerable and all that. So I think relationships might suffer the more time is spent, like the more people spend time being online, but I'm not really sure about that. But it's just how a vibe I get from that. Because people always default to like the safe options, right? And the more safe options there are, usually the worse you get at like the really, you know, let's say risky part of life, which are kind of inevitable in many ways. Um, the third aspect I was thinking of, like school and work, like how much are those shaped by self hatred? Like how much is school and work functional only because people hate themselves? Because honestly, like I don't think anyone really enjoys school like or work. Quite honestly, like maybe work some people do. I don't know. I doubt that anyone really enjoys the work itself. From what I've seen, it's mostly been like, you know, socializing with other people. But like, school is like just a fucking awful time to be in. Like, I don't think anyone would really disagree with that. And it really makes me think like how much of those institutions are only functional because of the shame that is put onto those two students in order to like study and all that. Because I don't know, like if students were like threatened and they weren't like ashamed if they didn't like study, for instance, like would anyone really care about the incredibly boring material that's presented to them? Like Personally, I don't really think so. But then again, I don't really know. It's hard for me to imagine what this type of society or schooling would even look like if shame wasn't the main mechanism for people to do something. And yeah, it's just crazy, right? The the extent to which society is shaped by this. You could call it like the wheel of shame, or the way people who hate themselves they then project that onto other people. For instance, they would probably like transmit that to their children, and for instance, or like people who like hate themselves who then become narcissists and who then like you know breed even more self-hatred by creating toxic relationships and all that. Like it's a really p- pervasive pattern that keeps happening over and over, like the pattern of shame. And I think it's worth keeping that in mind when it just feels really difficult to like undo that coercion, like to allow uh, yourself to just be as you are, right? So, I think like many people talk about loving yourself, but I think it's in practice I find it very difficult to actually apply because um, honestly, in my life, I don't think I've ever like felt genuine love from someone else because like it's all the relationships I've been in, they've always been like you know in an exchange type of dynamic, right? So someone gives me something because they expect something in return and all that. And so like to me like just the sense of love is not really present in my system. But I think there's definitely one thing which exists in me, which is like a sort of you could call it like softness. Like I don't know if I don't know if it might simply be love at the end of the day, but like it's more like the softness type where like instead of trying to prove someone wrong or like trying to always see the problems in something, the softness view is simply to like ask genuine questions about something or like to simply be curious about someone. And I think that's the way. Sorry, I need to sneeze. Yeah, I think that's the way I relate to myself the most in like a I'll say in like a softer way. I need to sneeze again. So yeah, so instead of loving myself, essentially, I think I much rather relate with the idea of simply like ask myself good questions to like sort of uncover the shame and all that, for instance. Because again, loving yourself, it's really hard, but like being curious about yourself, that's a lot more precise and like that's a much more. That's not precise is not the word. It's much more like easy to follow up on. And I guess another angle you could take is that you could simply allow yourself to be who you are, right? Like not even needing to love yourself, but simply allowing yourself. Even if it's only in small ways, right? I think um, I think it's worth recognizing that because it's a difficult process. The small wins they do matter. Right? It's very unrealistic that you would just like flip a switch and all of a sudden like the shame is just gone. But it's a deep problem in human society. It's a deep pattern that comes from many generations and that has been sustained by the external environment as well. So like I think it's worth recognizing the 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 global nature of it so that you don't start hating yourself or hating yourself. Like that's kind of a crazy thing when you think about it. But like the thing about like self improvement work is that sometimes sometimes you like sort of hate yourself for not doing as well as you feel like you could, and sometimes you feel bad because you're not good at like loving yourself, and that's kind of messed up when you think about it, right? Like that's like it's kind of weird. Like it feels like in that case what you need is a sense of like meta compassion. So like having compassion for yourself, even for the parts of you that do not have compassion for you, if that makes sense. So like you simply love yourself or like accept yourself, whatever you can manage, uh, and you do that even if there are parts of you that don't accept yourself. So like that's kind of like meta self-acceptance, which is kind of a weird thing, right? Because but you know, it's it's kind of obvious when stay this way that you don't want to hate yourself or hating yourself, but in practice that's kind of what happens to us. Like it's a really sticky pattern, right? And I think it's the kind of pattern that is quite clearly much easier to observe than it is to undo, which is why I'm not feeling very. I mean, I still have a fair amount of self-hatred in me, so it's not like I have any like magic trick to like undo it. But I think yeah, just like the small baby steps of allowing yourself to be a certain way and to just ask better and better questions about who you are and where it comes from is I think those are very helpful. And and to come back on the title of the video, you know, the most courageous thing in life is to not hate yourself. Uh, what I notice is that in society, like the implicit assumption is that in order to have results, you need to like some in a way like pay a cost of in terms of suffering, right? Like so the way in which people talk about no pain, no gain, or the idea of grinding and so on. Like there's this implicit idea that like every external result only comes from like a type of suffering associated to it. And I'm not sure I really agree, you know, like it's first of all, I guess the first thing to question is like why do you desire the external result in the first place? But you know, secondly, assuming you do want those, you do want genuine those, and that you are not just acting from a mimetic point of view. Well, I'm not sure I really agree that you know it's always about like a form of like pain or grind or whatever. I think it's I think very often I was you know in like my personal life, it's very rare that like there is no way for me to not enjoy it more by simply allowing myself to just be whoever I was, or allowing myself to fail or whatever. Like it's very rare that like there is only one way to achieve something, and that it and that this way just happens to be like the shame path or whatever. This just seems like a very suspicious assumption to me. At the very least, it should be questioned because it's um it's very destructive, and also it's very inefficient if it's not true for you. Because like I find that often you can accomplish just the exact same things that you can do right now, but much easier if you don't put so much pressure on yourself. And it's kind of crazy, right, to just feel it and to just do without all that pressure. But like I think I think a lot of people are unconsciously have this fear that like if they don't put pressure on themselves, then they will not do the things accepted by them by society. But I think that then the question to ask is like, why? It's like, what do you want to do then? Like if maybe none of the things that you do within society uh, will be done by like a less coercive self, but like at the same time, uh, to what extent do you want to be in society is my question, right? Like, do you even want to be in society? Like, like there's no problem being non-functional within society if you're not really living in society, right? Obviously, to some extent, we all have to live within society because it's like at this point it's global and all of that. But like you, there are many ways to not live within society. Is what I'm saying, right? So this might not be as bad as intention as it uh, initially seems, but it's uh, it's very scary for sure, right? Which is why the title of this video is like the most courageous thing in life is to not hate yourself. It's very scary in many ways, right? Because the default is to coerce yourself. It is to force yourself to do things you don't want. Um, but I think the point I want to end with is that it is not necessarily as difficult as it might seem, because at least when you have, when you drop that game of like self coercion, at least you're working with yourself. Like wherever you are, you're at least working with yourself. Whereas if you still keep like living the lifestyle of like societal self hatred that is perpetuated to us uh, throughout the generations, well, you don't even. I mean, what do you have then? Like you don't really have yourself, and you have like society which doesn't really care about you. Like It seems like a kind of a bad trade. I don't know. It's obviously much more complicated than this simplistic dichotomy that I'm presenting, but yeah, I think I'm kind of starting to ramble at this point. So yeah, thanks for listening, and I see you next time.